Could we ask you to come up and join us? We're about ready to start our program. Well, we're happy to have everyone with us this evening. You may have noticed that we had a change of plans, change of program. Chris Benda was called back home unexpectedly. He was actually in the area on the weekend and was planning to just stay over and do his program, but unexpectedly had to go back home today. So we were rescued. Our co-president, Ann Schreifels, she was going to be our program in October, and she graciously said that she would do our program tonight. So I'm really looking forward to this. I was intrigued when she gave us her title originally, and I'll get into that a little more later. But I wanted you to know you are in the right place. It's just a different program tonight. So we have a few announcements, and then I'll give Ann's introduction.
Okay, I just have two things. For anybody that's interested in participating in our iNaturalist program to document non-cultivated native plants in the 7-county area that the pollinator pathway covers, Janet Schroeder is here to answer questions for you. So take advantage of that. Oh, you got it. And she's set a table back here on this side. The other thing is our plant sale is on May 18th. It's from 8 to 1 in Carlock at the East White Oak Community Building. Cash and check only. I think that's it.
Okay. So apparently we had a highly successful field trip yesterday. Yeah. 22 people attended. So our next field trip is May 11th at Humiston Woods near Pontiac, and it's led by Kathy Montgomery, Sandy Knight, and Ed Lipinski. And the contact person is Kathy Montgomery. So you'll get more of that later, but her email address is Kathy with a C, M72@live.com. On May 1st, Ann Schreifels and I will be presenting for the Normal Public Library, Getting Started with Natives. And that's going to be at the Normal Community Activity Center, which is where Heartland Theater is. We have a new youth education committee who have been charged with creating several activities for different age levels to be used with our booth. And we're looking for more members and a chair. So if you're interested in that, please let one of the board members know. And let's see what else. Oh, we've also been contacted by the McLean County Historical Society, who is putting in some native gardens at the courthouse square. And they'll be planting those April 22nd, but they would like for us to assist with maintaining those gardens because they have volunteers who don't know what native plants look like and they pull them out. So you'll hear more about that, but we do have some people already that said they were interested in helping to maintain public gardens. So we'll find out more about that. And then also tonight we wanted to introduce our committee chairs. So as I call your name, if you would please stand. We have Tom Niebuhr is in charge of field trips. And don't think Patty's here, but Garden Centers, Patty Irwin. Sarah Lindenbaum is in charge of the library. Sarah's back there with the library. Jennifer Sharkey is in charge of our newsletter. Jennifer. Amy Woodrum is in charge of Pollinator Pathway. And Janet Rasmussen takes care of social media and website. And we do have a Forever Wild partnership that we help people get started with native plantings, and those are for nonprofits, and I coordinate that right now. And then Marlene Henteman is our volunteer coordinator, and she has some announcements. And she's the last one, and then we'll get to Ian.
I'm between you and the program. Okay, so wanted to talk to you today about some real exciting programs that we have coming up, some events that we've been invited to showcase our information booth at. So our information booth, if you're not familiar with that, is that table at the very back as you look down the center aisle that has all the pamphlets and the information about native plants and about wild ones. So to get invited to present or to hold this booth at these events is a really great opportunity for us to spread how important native plants are for our ecosystem. It also gives us a chance to talk about wild ones. I don't know if this is anybody else's situation, but that's how I learned about wild ones. Is I went to an event and there was an information booth. I started talking to people. I read some brochures and voila, here I am. So I really think it's a great opportunity to not only educate people and spread the word about native plants, but also about wild ones and just like-minded people. So we need some volunteers, though, to man these booths. The problem we have, and it's a great problem, we have 4 events that are being held on 2 different days. So we kind of have to double team and figure out how we're going to man those booths. So the 4 events are Earth Day Festival at Forest Nature Park, and that's on April 20th. So this is really to celebrate Earth Day. It's thinking globally and acting locally. So there'll be a lot of vendors there with earth-friendly products, local food, and activities. Also on April 20th is Casey's Garden Shop, and it's their spring kickoff and their anniversary celebration. So there's going to be lots of giveaways, kids' activities, sales, and treats, and then a bunch of different vendors as well. On May 4th is Ripple, and that's going to be held at Fairview Park in Normal. And that's really about clean water. And this is for all ages as well. So there's going to be booths and activities and just really community groups sharing about how impactful and their impactful initiatives and how we can help maintain clean water. And then also on May 4th is the Native Plant Festival at Parkland College in Champaign. So this is a free event, and there are just a plant sale, a lot of different resources that have talk a lot about pollinator gardens and also supply information. So things that you might be able to purchase for your own gardens. If this is something that you think you would like to participate in, there is a sign-up sheet on the welcome table or the sign-in table. I'm not sure what we call that table, but there's a whiteboard where you can just sign up for an event. There's also a link in the member email that you should have received last Thursday, or it might have been Friday, and 10 days prior to that. So in that link, in that email, you can click on that link and it'll take you directly to an electronic sign-up place. You can also sign up there as well. I've heard some people have maybe not been getting all of their emails from membership. So if you're having issues with that, if you didn't get that email 4 days ago or 10 days ago, go to your membership website for Wild Ones, check your email, make sure that that's correct. If you're still having issues, it's either myself or Kathy Packard in the back there. So I think that's all I had. Thank you.
One more thing. Sorry. We've been reminded by the church to keep all the refreshments on the carpet. Now at home, I prefer it not on the carpet, but here they want the refreshments to be kept on the carpeted area so they don't have to clean this. So if you can eat back there, that would be great. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, if you're not sure you want to work at a booth, we don't put somebody that's not had any experience or a new member by themselves. So we'll make sure that you have an experienced member. So please sign up.
And one more announcement. Our August program is going to be about stewards, and you can contact me by email if you are a steward of any public lands or public areas. And that's just going to be a real sharing time. We'll create a PowerPoint that night. I have had some response, but if you're a steward somewhere and you have not contacted me, please do. So you'll have that in an email too. So back to our program. Monarchs, their migration, and milkweeds battle plan. Or in Anne's shortened version, she says, monarchs versus milkweed. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about how we came to this. Anne's a very busy person. She says she's had a love of nature since she was a child, and she would happily go outside and enjoy nature in lieu of doing inside chores for her mother. So she had a reason to get interested in nature. She did have a career in business, but she took early retirement in order to pursue her true passion, which is ecological restoration. She's a master naturalist in Woodford County. She's a steward with the Parklands Foundation. She's the secretary of the Peoria Wilds Land Trust. And as I said earlier, and you know, she's our co-president. She also has a Facebook and Instagram account, and it's called An Acre of Nature. So if you want to check that out. And if you were at our member potluck 2 years ago, you probably had the treat of going to Anne's home, and you found out that her home is truly surrounded by natives. And her saying is, enjoying the wonders of nature is as easy as walking outside your front door. And that's certainly true at her house. So, on to the program. This is an appropriate topic. So you might already know that the monarch is our state insect. And many of us grow milkweeds. We've been encouraged to grow milkweeds. An interesting twist to this is that she will share with us some interesting insight into the evolutionary struggle that's going on between the monarch butterflies and this host plant, the milkweed. So prepare to be enlightened. As she will also tell you, her speaker notes will be made available to all of you with the hope that you will go and share some of her information with others. So she'll tell you how that might happen. So welcome, Anne. Thank you so much for doing this tonight.
Well, first off, thank you everybody for not walking out the door when you heard that the speaker changed. So that's very polite of you. I appreciate that. And whenever Kathy gives an introduction, it made me sound so legitimate. But honestly, I'm not a butterfly researcher. I don't have any butterfly training. So I'm just an enthusiastic nature lover like all of us. So when I originally put this presentation together, I had anticipated it. My first presentation would be for third graders, and I could get by with a lot. I was not expecting that it would be in front of people who know a lot more than me. So it makes me a little bit nervous in that respect. But bear with me as we go through this. My reason for giving it here to Wild Ones is because I want to make this presentation, the speaker notes, and everything in it as kind of a takeaway for you so that you can go give it to your third grade class or your Boy Scout troop or book club or wherever you want to take it. This slide pack is all publicly available photos, either from me or from public sources, and the information's all verified and double checked. So It can be kind of pared down and simplified for little kids, or you can ramp it up if you want to get all nerdy and technical with a lot of good information for adults. So the goal is not to just listen to it tonight, but to listen to it with the idea of how would you give it to another group that you're associated with, if that makes sense. And how this came to be is about noon today, I got a call from Kathy saying, uh-oh, we don't have a speaker for tonight. So this presentation was scheduled for October. So I thought, well, I have all summer long to update the photos. I can update the statistics. I can practice. All that went out the window. And I said, yikes, I don't even know where I can find the file. So I quick dug it out of the deep filing cabinet in my computer and pulled it up and clicked through the slides a little bit. So I'm not as polished, and this is not going to flow as well as I would have liked it to, but bear with me. We're all friends here. So we'll just jump into it. And like I said, you guys probably know as much about monarchs as I do, so answer questions when I start stumbling. But first of all, this is the state insect of Illinois. An interesting anecdote, Kathy just told me her grandson goes to the school in Decatur where that class got together and got this butterfly nominated, which I think is pretty cool. And their school mascot are the Monarchs. So that's kind of a fun little fact. The sad part, though, about monarchs is that their numbers have declined massively since the 1990s. They're over 90% down, and it goes up and down each year. But it's a dramatic decline, and that's scary to see that happening. And most of it, in one way or another, is attributable to us humans. So if we can take the monarch numbers down that far, we can also bring them back up. So there is reason for hope. Now, the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, I think it is, has declared migrating monarchs as endangered, which is totally different from the Endangered Species Act, which is a governmental agency. So you get asked all the time, are monarchs endangered or not? And yes and no is the answer. So it goes back and forth. So they're not federally protected, but they are on that organization, on the red list, if that makes sense. But the main thing to talk about monarchs is they're amazing. That's the fun part, not just because they're declining and just because, they're our state insect, but they're awfully cool butterflies. So this presentation is going to go through 4 parts. First, we'll talk about monarchs, then we'll talk about their migration, then we'll talk about milkweed, and then what you can do. And I'll try to go kind of quickly, but if you have questions, we can spend more time, and feel free to holler. It's just us friends here, so we don't have to make it difficult. I know the fact that I have a microphone makes it seem like it's formal, but it isn't. We're just talking about bugs. Okay, so monarchs. And this is where you can get really geeky if you want to with the taxonomy of starting with, the kingdom and the phylum and the class and the order and everything. But the point of this slide is really just to talk about there are a lot of animals in the world, from 10 to 30 million different species of animals. But there's only 13 in this genus and only 1 monarch butterfly. And nobody speaks Latin fluently anymore. There's no native speakers, so you can't really get the name wrong. But the typical way to pronounce the Latin name of the butterfly is Danius plexippus. So everybody say that. Danius plexippus. Excellent. This is kind of like being at church, actually. And where do they live? We think of them as a North American species, or U.S. and Canada primarily, and Mexico, but they actually live all over the world. So it's what we're talking about today is our eastern migrating monarchs, but they actually live on the west coast. They live in northern South America, northern Africa, Southern Europe, and in some of the islands. Now, whether they got there through wind, if they were blown in, or human moved, it's not entirely known, but there are monarch populations and there is milkweed. So it's not just ours. So as a species, they're not endangered. What's in danger is the migration. So that's an interesting differential there. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about each stage of the life cycle here, but it's a complete metamorphosis. So it goes from egg to caterpillar to chrysalis to adult. So it just keeps making a continuous circle there. And like I said, we'll talk a little bit here, the egg stage, that's typically 3 to 4 days in the egg stage. And the timing varies. If it's cold out, it's going to take longer. If it's warm, they're cold-blooded animals, so it's going to take faster or shorter depending on external temperatures. But on average, 3 to 4 days in the egg stage. So here's a little video. I'll interrupt it in a little bit, but this is this teeny tiny, if you've ever seen a monarch egg, how many have seen monarch eggs? Okay, good, more than half people. They're itty bitty. They're the size of the tip of a ballpoint pen, just tiny, tiny little eggs. So this is zoomed in, super magnified. I think I took this video on my iPhone and with a lot of patience waiting because I could see something moving inside the egg. I could see a little black spot in there moving. So I waited and used a lot of iPhone memory to get this. But finally, he started busting out. So this little guy started crawling out. And here he comes, crawling out there. In this video, we don't have to watch through the whole thing. But maybe, Caleb, if you can fast forward him a little bit, he's going to pop out here. And that's good. And then he's going to turn around. And the first thing that he does, he's going to turn around and eat his eggshell. That's full of all kinds of nutrition. So he's just going to chow that right down. So that's his first meal. So that's the little guy. So that's 1 to 3 days as an egg. Now he's in a first instar. He'll stay that size 1 to 3 days. So I think I have a pointer here. So second instar, he gets a little bit bigger. Still not real big, but you can see him with your naked eyes. This one, you need reading glasses if you're my age. This one, you can start to see that there's a caterpillar there. He starts to get some of the coloring. But notice that the eating is holes in the leaf. So in the later instars, they'll just chow down on the edge of a leaf, just like, they go crazy when they get big. But at this stage, they're still eating holes in the leaf surface. Third instar, a little bit bigger, they're chubby little caterpillars at this stage. The easiest way to tell them apart, and there's really no reason you need to know which instar they're in. It's just to sound like you're smart. But they get a little bit bigger. And what they do for an instar, it just means they're molting. So they shed their skin because they can't grow. So once their skin fills up, they have to get rid of it and start all over again. So they'll literally walk out of their skin. They will pause for maybe a day. You'll see them just not eating because normally this caterpillar's job is to eat. And so if he stops eating, either something's wrong or he's about to molt. And they'll just literally walk right out of their skin. And just like with the egg, he'll turn around and eat that skin. So appetizing. Fourth instar, getting much bigger. And the biggest way, the difference to tell are these filaments here. On a fourth instar, they're pretty uniform from start to finish. The fifth instar, the last stage, the tips get really skinny. So you can start to see them in the fifth stage where the tips of the filaments get really skinny. So 5 instars, total time period, 7 to 17 days or so. So a little more than a week, a little less than 3 weeks, sometime in there. Now, it's important if you're looking at caterpillars to know all their parts, right? So this is kind of fun for little kids to learn and look at here. But they're an insect, and every insect has segmented 3 bodies. So you've got a head, got a little bit of a thorax, and you have an abdomen here. So insects all have this, so that's common to caterpillars. They have 6 true legs, just like all insects have 6 legs. So they have 6 true legs. But then what about all these? These look like legs. They're fake. Those are prolegs. So these are fake here. So they have 8 prolegs, and then they have anal prolegs. Again, this is something that little kids love to talk about. And then anal claspers. Think how much fun your 3rd grader's going to have with that one. These are not antennae. They do have antennae, but these are not it. These are called filaments on the front and the back. So they kind of function like antennae, but they actually have antennae too. So you can't see their eyes, you can't see their antenna, and you can't see their spinneret, but they all exist in there. So it's kind of cool caterpillar anatomy 101 here. So they grow fast. Like I said, they're basically digestive systems. Eat and poop is pretty much all this caterpillar does. So if a human baby grew as fast at the same rate that a monarch caterpillar grew, in 1 year's time, that human would weigh as much as 35 elephants. So that is a pretty amazing growth rate on that caterpillar. So there's times of the year I feel like I match that growth rate, but caterpillars still have it down. So after the larval stage, it's time to go into the pupal stage. So they pupate. And so I'll start the video, and then we'll come back and look at the chrysalises here. So the pupal stage is where the caterpillar turns into the chrysalis. And what they'll do prior to getting to this stage is they'll use their spinneret, which makes the silk, and they'll spread a little silky web and make a little button. That little white button on top is silk. So it's just white silk up there. Then remember those anal claspers? Those are the fun parts. They will walk around, turn around, back up to that button and latch on. So they will grab that by their butt, literally, and hang down in that characteristic J shape. So they hang by their back end and their head kind of curls up, and they make that J shape. Then after being in that shape for about a day or so, and this usually happens in the morning. All the monarchs I've ever seen have always pupated in the morning. So maybe it's something about the light triggers them or something. But their skin literally splits open from the back of their head, just splits open. So it goes from looking like a caterpillar to this kind of yellowish, greenish blob kind of thing. And it's just pushing. It's got its ab workout going. It's pushing, getting that skin up to the top. And then pretty soon he's gonna get a little crazy on us. We'll give him a second to push some more skin up there. But you can kind of see what the shape of the butterfly chrysalis is going to look like. But it's really soft at this point. I mean, it's wet, it's soft, it's gooey. So that's, your caterpillar insides here just turned into a chrysalis. Now, once he gets that skin all the way to the top, or she, I shouldn't be sexist about caterpillars because we don't know at this point. There's no way to tell a boy caterpillar from a girl caterpillar. So at this point, we don't know. But the interesting thing about caterpillars, just a little side note, is they do have memory. So they don't turn entirely to mush inside the cocoon, the chrysalis. Cocoons are for moths. Inside the chrysalis, they can retain memory. So they've tested them with stimuli in a laboratory where they've taught a caterpillar to avoid a sound or a vibration or something. And they show that when the adult comes out, it still reacts to that stimuli. So I thought that was pretty interesting, that because this little insect turns to mush and makes a butterfly, it still remembers what's happening. So now it's going all crazy because who wants that thing hanging around? So it's going to really whip itself around quite a bit right now until finally it falls off. I don't know if they feel it or if they just automatically know to do that. I think it's just amazing that they can do this. No, this is real time. Yep. So I think the whole video might have been 2.5, 3 minutes. So from when the head splits in half to now is probably about 2 minutes. Yeah. I mean, every time it happens, you have to watch. You can't, when this is going on, you can't turn away because it's just so cool. But he still wants that off there. I thought it would fill a little faster, but it's about, there it goes. Okay, so he'll calm down in a minute. But then what it turns into, so that little green blob turns into this absolutely gorgeous chrysalis. So it's green, it's got this ring of golden spots around the top there. It's just cool as can be. And then as it gets close, so this is in there from a week to 2 weeks or so. Normally 10 to 15 days is pretty typical. At the very end, so this is right before it's about to eclose. And we don't call it hatching because hatching is what happens with an egg. It's eclosing. So you sound really smart when you use these big words. It ecloses from here, but it'll be transparent on the day before. So you'll know that it's coming because you can start to see the wing patterns in there and everything. So this guy, there we go. So you'll watch this one eclose. And just like with most species, head first. So it's going to split open at the bottom, and that's where the head is. So remember those, it was attached by its rear end, and that's still the rear end on the top. So that's kind of same orientation as the caterpillar. And now it's starting to split open and come out. So he's, again, those abs, you gotta work on those abs because he's really pushing to get out of that chrysalis. There's his head coming out, some feet. He's got a couple legs reached around and grabbed up on the chrysalis. And see these things right here? Remember what those are. We'll talk about those on the next slide. But he's got his legs out, pushing, and then in one big move, he's going to just flop right out. Boom. So big fat butterfly abdomen here, skinny tiny little wings there. So what will happen next is all this fluid in there will get pumped out into the wings. So those tiny little wings will fill out and dry and become the beautiful butterfly that we know. But I always think that's just an amazing transformation. And when they come out, they pump up their wings. Then we can tell the difference if it was a boy or a girl. So the characteristic sign of the boy are these little dots right here. Those are pheromone dots. I don't know I forget what the actual name for them is, but they release pheromones so they can tell that it's a male versus a female. And so that's the telltale sign. There's a little bit of difference on the wings, but in the field, I don't think you would be able to tell when they're busy flying and fluttering around. There's a little bit more curve on the wings. So for the most part, just look for those dots. And they're easy to see. So butterfly anatomy, also pretty simplistic. Remember, we said all insects have 6 legs, but if you start looking at your butterfly, the most you're ever going to see is 4, which, is confusing because where did those other legs go? But remember those 2 little things next to its head? They're there. You can't see them. Those are those are legs. They just don't look like the other 2 legs. They're tiny little, I think that's why they call them the bush-footed butterflies, because they have just these little stubs of legs up by their heads, but they don't use them as legs. They don't function as legs. They have true antennae now, so they have 2 antennae. They have a proboscis, which is kind of their drinking mechanism, hind wing and a forewing. So pretty basic. Still 3 body segments, head, thorax, and abdomen, just like all insects. Now, one of the things that we learn about monarchs pretty early on. You had a question, Doug? Basically, yes. The size difference, there's some question about whether the migrating monarchs are larger or smaller. So there's studies ongoing right now. Some scientists say the migrating ones are bigger. Some say they're the same size. So still to be determined on some of this. Now, the monarchs are known for their toxicity. And one thing I was going to try to learn before I got here, and maybe one of you knows, are they toxic or are they poisonous? I can never remember the difference between whether they're toxic or poisonous. But whatever they are, they are. So birds, if they eat them, they usually spit them back out. So they're distasteful and they're poisonous. So if a bird or another animal actually ate them, it would cause some severe stomach upset, if not kill them outright. And we'll get into a little bit of that. That's kind of a prelude to the milkweed discussion. So they're poisonous, but this guy here looks very similar to a monarch, but he's total copycat because not poisonous. That's a viceroy. And those are in this area. So you see viceroys a lot. They're a little bit smaller, but other than that, they look a lot like a monarch. The lines here are what tells them apart most easily on those viceroys. But they did that intentionally because they know if they look like a monarch, the birds and the other critters are not going to go after them either. And then you've got another one like the painted lady, not poisonous, but same thing, orange, white, and black. So it looks kind of similar. So they're totally copying it. It's called Batesian mimicry, if you want to get super technical about it. Same goes for the caterpillars, not camouflaged caterpillars. Like a lot of caterpillars are kind of dull brown. They might use spikes and different defense mechanisms. Monarch caterpillars are bold and they're proud of it. And they're also distasteful. But the swallowtails, which look a lot like monarchs, totally fine for birds to eat. So if a bird eats a swallowtail caterpillar first, it says, oh, yummy, and then it gets a monarch caterpillar, it's going to have a very different experience. So the swallowtails are hoping that the monarchs train the birds. And then there's a queen caterpillar. I've never actually seen a queen butterfly or caterpillar. They're a little bit south of here. Has anybody else seen them in the area? Not in the area, but so I'd like to see them. They're pretty cool looking caterpillars too, but they are poisonous. So reproduction, so this is where we get a little R-rated here, but I think we're all adults, so we should be okay. The males have territories and they'll defend them. So they'll try to pick a nice place, they'll scope it out. It's got some nectar, it's got some milkweed, and he's got his prime location and he's gonna stake it out and he's gonna defend it. So if another male comes in, and monarchs can tell this really easily, he's gonna fight him off. He's gonna chase him away, they're gonna tussle in the air, and one of them's gonna win the prime location. Now, if a female comes by, he's going to look all handsome and attractive for her because he wants her to hang out in his patch of milkweed and flowers. But their dating life looks very similar to a male chasing off another male. It's not a love match, shall we say. It's very aggressive. But the males have something which is really interesting, I think. It's called a spermatophore. And so it's more than just, sperm cells, like we've all learned in biology. It's more than that. It has a little nutrient package because the process of reproduction takes a lot of energy, especially for females. So nature has evolved in such a way that about 10% of his body weight goes into this. So he gives her like a little package that helps her create the eggs. And she creates about 300 to 400 eggs in a season or in her lifetime. So it's kind of amazing that they share that partnership a little bit. And then the female, once she's fertilized and the eggs are ready, they detect the milkweeds' chemical levels through their feet. So they have essentially taste receptors on their feet. So she'll fly around and land on this milkweed, and then she'll try a different one. And if you're ever out in the field somewhere trying to follow a female monarch that's laying eggs, because you want to get that perfect shot where she's laying an egg, which I'm guilty. It's very frustrating that she doesn't just land on the nearest milkweed where you're standing and lay an egg, where you have your focus set. But she'll test it out and say, not good enough. And then she'll try another one, still not. And so she'll flutter all over the place before she finally lays an egg. And she just lays one at a time. So it's not like a whole mass of eggs. Some insects will lay, dozens of eggs or a whole clutch of eggs. Monarchs go one by one. So usually if there's enough milkweed, one egg per plant even. But when there's not enough milkweed, they'll do multiple leaves of the milkweed because she's got 300 eggs to deal with. I've seen them mostly on the undersides. Not every monarch follows what they're supposed to do. I see them a lot on the flowers too. So they like the tender new shoots the best. So once the leaves get kind of old and rough, you don't see eggs on those. You'll see them up towards the top of the plant or on the tenderest leaves, usually on the underside. Now, there are predators. So even though with all that bold claim to don't eat me, there are insects and birds and mammals that have evolved to eat them and to handle the chemicals that are in them that make them toxic to everybody else. So parasitoids, if you raise monarchs, one of the banes of your existence are these darn tachinid flies. And they're super sneaky because the caterpillar will be living its best caterpillar life. And this fly comes along and it lays an egg on the caterpillar, which hatches into a larva inside the caterpillar. And the two grow up together. the monarch caterpillar and this fly maggot, I guess, would be inside there, and they grow up. And it's usually not until the caterpillar's in his 5th instar, or sometimes even in a chrysalis, when the caterpillar dies, the monarch caterpillar dies. And then you'll see a white silk string hanging from the caterpillar. I don't know if you can see it you probably can't see it in that picture, but there's like a thread, a white silk thread hanging from the caterpillar. And that's because the fly maggot on the inside came out and kind of rappelled down this safety line to safety, and almost immediately turns into pupates and turns into its cocoon. It's kind of like a little brown Rice Krispie, the size of a little brown Rice Krispie, and hides under leaf litter or whatever. I mean, it's hard to see these little cocoons from these flies, but they will kill lots of monarchs every year. So that's how nature works. Those flies have to live too. But when we're talking about our monarchs and how much they've declined, it's kind of hard to see one die. Other things will eat caterpillars, especially the small ones. So you'll see spiders, you'll see praying mantises, wasps, stink bugs, lots of things will eat the little caterpillars. And then adults, not much will eat a monarch adult intentionally, except down in Mexico. And that's where a couple of species of birds and a mouse have adult monarch butterflies as their favorite food. So talking about Mexico, we move into the miracles of migration. And that's what's really, really cool about this insect. I mean, they're just darn pretty and cool by themselves. But the fact that they go from Canada down to Mexico, one butterfly, and a butterfly weighs about as much as a paperclip. So imagine this little flying paperclip figuring out how to get from Canada down to this little tiny spot. That spot is way bigger than it actually is in real geography. But it's kind of cool. And what we're talking about here is this eastern migration. There's a little bit of migration on the West Coast where they all kind of congregate on the Pacific coast. There's a few that will migrate on the west side of the mountains to the same place. And then in Florida, they actually have a resident population that just is continuously reproducing. So it doesn't go anywhere. It just stays there all winter long. But that's pretty amazing. And the way that this was discovered is also, it's not really debated. It's debated about which scientist gets their name on it. But it all happened in the 1970s with citizen science. And if you think about it, back in the 70s, we didn't have an app on our phone where we saw a monarch and we tapped it in or anything like this. This all happened by putting ads in magazines, asking for people to sign up to tag monarchs and report back if they saw them. So they were literally writing postcards and handwritten letters to these scientists saying what they've seen. So I thought that was amazing. So it was, I forget which year, but it was in the 70s that they actually conclusively determined that monarchs from the northern US made it down to Mexico. But how do they know when to go? How does a monarch, which is third generation Illinoisan, how does it know that this is the one that's going to go to Mexico? And there's a couple keys. I mean, there's still a lot to be determined with science, but temperature swings. So it's not necessarily just overall lower temperatures, but the swings between night and day to day. Shorter days, they're very sensitive to sunlight. So as the days start getting shorter, and this is the same for hummingbirds, as the days start getting shorter, starts being a signal in their brain that it's time to move on. And then the milkweed declines. So if you're a caterpillar and your milkweed's not that great, that's another signal to you that you're that generation. You're the one that's going to go south. So where they go in Mexico is in the Sierra Madre Mountains. It's the Oyamel fir trees is the ones that they like. And this is not red pine leaves. Those are red butterflies, just absolutely covering the trees. And there's some concern about their overwintering habitat because they all congregate down there. So that is just ripe for disaster. When you're that concentrated at all your monarchs are in one basket, so to speak. So if something goes wrong, they could have an ice storm down there. They could have logging happening. So many things can go wrong down in Mexico. But the Mexican government is very pro-butterfly. They've created a biosphere reserve. It's not always 100% protected. There are people, that go in and do some illegal activities, but for the most part, they have this. It's a tourist attraction. And when I read, well, it's 217 square miles, I thought, wow, that's huge. That's a lot of habitat protection down there. But then I looked up, anybody know how many square miles in McLean County? Yes? Okay, I'll tell you. It's 1,200 square miles. So that suddenly made that 200 square miles seem very small if McLean County is 1,200. So it's great. It's absolutely fantastic that it's protected down there, but it's still a pinch point for the species. And how do they get there? Because they're starting, a butterfly in Maine and a butterfly in North Dakota. They're coming from two different points. How do they get down to Mexico? And this is an interesting evolutionary trick. It's not just monarchs that do this. Other birds and other species do this as well. It's called a time-compensated compass. So in the morning, like if you're facing south, and this would be your west and your east, your sun's coming up over here, but you know that because it's just sunrise and it's 9 in the morning, say, and then your sun's over here. Now your sun starts to move up over here. So at 3 o'clock, your sun's over here, but you still know that south is this direction because you know how long the sun's been shining. So it's a really fascinating way that they know where to go and how to get there. It's the magnet theory. Sometimes the Earth magnetism has sort of been disproven, but I think there's still some work to figure out how they narrow it that precisely to those 217 square miles. But really interesting that this itty bitty little insect in that little itty bitty little brain has enough instinct to go on that compass. I don't think any of us would get to this location if somebody just turned us loose. But then, so we've got monarchs, we've got migration, and now that darn milkweed is trying to ruin everything. Again, back to our geeky, sciencey part, the taxonomy of milkweed. What's interesting is there's only 400,000-ish plants in the world. Remember, there were up to 30 million animals, only 400,000 plants. But that goes way down to 200 or so species of milkweed. And then I forget the exact number, I think less than 20 or so in Illinois. But there's a lot of different milkweed species. We tend to know the ones that we know that are in kind of the landscape trade, but there's a lot of milkweed species out there. And it's, Asclepius is how you say that one. Those are all these words that you only ever write or read. You hardly ever say these things, but it's Asclepius. And these 9, I think, up here are the ones that are most commonly sold in different native plant sales or typically available. And they come in all sizes, not all colors. It's mostly pink with some orange and white thrown in there. But they'll take the ones in bright yellow, like these here. Those are sunny. The paler yellow is partial. And then the dark one, poke milkweed, is good for shade. So every dry, wet, sunny, shady, there's a milkweed species out there that your habitat can probably support. Interestingly enough, here's a butterfly researcher said, milkweeds do not need monarchs because butterflies are simply no good as pollinators. They are simply pests. And I thought that was interesting because we'd all grown up with this idea of mutualism that, the kindly milkweeds give up some of their leaves and the monarchs pollinate for them. So we always hear this, symbiotic relationship between the two. But from the milkweed's perspective, no way. There is nothing that monarch is doing for him. Absolutely nothing. So the milkweed has like this pest attacking it. And so it has to react, right? Because if it was super nutritious, it would just be gobbled up. And they don't, grow back as fast as, say, a grass or something. So the milkweeds do not want monarchs on them. Absolutely do not. So they have a lot of defense strategies that we're going to talk about. But first, life cycle of milkweeds. And it's a plant, so it's not as exciting as what a butterfly goes through. But it comes out of the ground, and this is like a perennial coming back out of the ground. This is not a seedling, but this will pokes out. And it always frustrates me because these are the last things to come out in the spring. And I always wonder, is it going to come back? Where's the milkweed? but then it comes back. And like in the case of something like this, I don't know for sure what this is. I think it's common milkweed, but it gets very tall and very prolific very quickly. So common milkweed is not probably the landscaper's milkweed, but the butterflies love it. Then it flowers and then it makes seeds. So kind of tried to make a life cycle here, but that's basically the 1 year stage of a milkweed plant. The pollination, though, is where it gets really interesting. If you take your normal flower, it's got pollen all over it. A bee comes to it, gets dusted in pollen, flies to another flower. A little bit of that dust wears off and you have a pollinated flower and you make a seed. Not so with milkweed. They make it very, very complicated. So in that milkweed flower here, this is an umbel full of flowers. So there's, 100 little flowers. This little thing is a flower. That's a single flower. This is a magnified version of that little thing. So it's got, 5. And this is what makes a milkweed is this type of flowering arrangement. So in there, you can see this little stigmatic chamber right here. It's just this tiny little part kind of buried under there. You really do need a magnifying lens to see that very clearly out in your yard. But what this has to happen, and for pollination to take place, is you need to have a big bee come by. Bumblebees are excellent choices for that. And their leg has to accidentally slip in there, because it's not in the bee's interest to get one of these things attached to it, because it's not the yummy pollen that it wants to bring back to its nest. These are big, heavy things. They come in pairs. I forget what all these pieces are called. That's what I was going to refresh up on for October, but instead you got me today. But it makes these pairs of things attached by this little part here, and that will stick to insects who happen to slip a leg in there. Then that same insect has to accidentally do it again on another milkweed flower, where his or her leg slides in there accidentally, and then it gets detached. They pull their leg out, and the pollinia stays in there. So how on earth did this evolve, and why is this so complicated? Because it just seems amazing to me that it goes against all common sense of pollination to make it hard to get pollinated. But it works. Milkweed's very successful and seeds are very fertile. So who are we to challenge their pollination strategy? And this is just a picture. I think this is a carpenter bee just covered in pollinia. So you can see them. And these are huge. You can see that with your naked eyes. So you can look at that. I know Janet's taken pictures with her phone where it's very clear that they have these attached to their legs. Now, what's tricky is if you're a little bee and your leg accidentally goes in there, you might get caught. So sometimes if you're looking at milkweed flowers, you'll see dead bees on them. And that's most likely because they got trapped there and they couldn't pull their leg back out. So it's kind of sad. So if you see a little bee trying to get out, give them a little tug. So milkweed has a battle plan here. So they have defenses against these nasty monarchs that are trying to eat them. So we'll talk about each of these 4 in a way, but the 5th measure, which I think is more ingenious than anything, is their PR agency. So they have hired some of the best PR people in the world, because you cannot go to a website or open a magazine without somebody telling you to plant more milkweed. So absolutely fantastic move by Team Milkweed is to get out there and get people planting milkweed, which is exactly what they have me doing here tonight, is telling everybody to plant milkweed. So we're all being influenced by these milkweed plants to get them planted. But throughout history, that's kind of a recent development that they've done. But throughout history, they've come up with these defenses. Number 1 are these hairs. So the trichomes, it varies by milkweed. Some are smooth. Most of them around here are hairy. But that's not edible to this little caterpillar. That's a deterrent to him or her. So what they actually have to do is nip them off at the base and create like a clearing, and then they can start eating the green stuff. So it's not toxic, it's not poisonous to the caterpillar, but it delays the time to first eating. And when you're that big, you need to start eating pretty quickly. So that's kind of annoying. Second one, super deadly though, is the latex in there. It's the white stuff that comes out of milkweed whenever you nick it a little bit. And I'm sure we've all had it. And that's very toxic to us too. The latex is very sticky. We don't want that. You get it in your eye. It can, I don't know, blindness, but it can really affect your eyesight. So be very careful working around milkweed, actually, never to get that in your eyes. But that latex is not what the monarchs are eating. So this is not the sap of the plant. It's not the nutrients. This is simply a defensive mechanism. It's basically the same as what's in a rubber tree that natural rubber is made out of, just in a smaller form, obviously, in milkweeds. But 60% of the caterpillars die on their first bite. So it's amazing. They take a little bite. Remember, this is an itty bitty, teeny tiny, not microscopic, but very little caterpillar. And the latex is under pressure. So as soon as that caterpillar takes a bite, the latex squirts out. And the goal of the plant is to glue the caterpillar's mouth shut. So depending on the caterpillar's luck, and I don't know if there's a lot of strategy into it, hopefully they can let that fall off to the side and not get it all over their face. But if they get it all over their face, it dries quickly, their mouth is glued shut, and they die. So milkweed's pretty successful with this strategy, I have to say. Their third mechanism is cardiac glycosides. And that is a chemical in milkweed, and it's actually been used in human medicine. There's stories back in the olden days about how milkweed was used as heart medicine, and it's still, cardiac meaning heart, is still being used, or a derivative of this. There's not actual milkweed fields that are being harvested for medicine, but this basic chemical is still being used in some heart medicines. So but if you have heart issues, don't go eating milkweed, because this is all not good. And monarchs are mostly immune to it. So they've evolved to be able to process this, where most other insects and mammals, like, you don't see milkweed being grazed by cows or bison or horses or anything, because it's very bitter and very toxic to them. But monarchs have evolved to handle it, but not too much. If it gets too much of it, it will still kill the caterpillar. So they have to find that sweet spot in there. And there's ways they can digest that too, depending on different strategies that the caterpillar uses. So I can go into that in a slide or two. But that's the reason why they're toxic to birds and butterflies. And then number 4, this one is pretty interesting. When a milkweed feels under attack, it sends out these volatile organic compounds. So these smells, so to speak. And so the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So guess what? Those flies that we talked about and some of the other predators of monarch caterpillars sense these chemicals, and they will hone in and say, hey, that milkweed is under attack. I wonder if some of my food is eating it. And then they'll zero in and find their prey. So it's just amazing that they've evolved with all of these different strategies. It's pretty successful. I think the latest statistic I've seen is only 10% of eggs make it all the way to adulthood. So those monarchs are laying lots of eggs. I think it's possible the number is even less. Milkweed is not exclusive to monarchs, though. There are lots of other little critters that make it home, and I'm not going to go into each of them, but there's bugs and beetles and tussock moths. Anybody ever seen a tussock moth? They love milkweed, and they don't do one caterpillar per plant. It's a massive amount of tussock moths, and they'll strip an adult milkweed plant down to the stem. But it's part of nature. You got to let them have their milkweed. There's even a fly, and this fly up here goes in between the two surfaces of the leaves. So it just is mining around in there until it emerges as a little itty bitty fly. Now, humans also use milkweed. So primarily the floss throughout history has been the main thing. It's been used for pillows and mattresses. It's very buoyant as a life preserver. It absorbs oil, still used in oil spill cleanup. If you can get a lot of floss, it'll suck it right up. Now, the first bullet point in third bullet point there are kind of in conflict with each other because you don't want your mattress to be super flammable, but it is very flammable. If kind of a party trick, if you're ever around a campfire and you have some milkweed floss, it goes poof kind of dramatically. So it's sort of a fun thing to do, but not something you want in your mattress. The oil from the seeds makes a good skin balm. It's used in some industrial lubricants. The stems are good for fiber, and then the latex can actually be turned into rubber. It just would take a lot of milkweeds. Now, there is a company, I've Googled on the internet, there is a company that is making products from milkweed. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but it is available. Some of it is using the fiber, and some of it is like a coat, I think it was, or replacing down in a jacket or something like that. So it was kind of cute. It's novelty stuff. It's not, a mainstream, but there's craft people out there. And I think you could probably weave, is that the right word? Or turn into string the floss like you do cotton in a way. What's that called? Spinning, yes. So how can you help? This is kind of the question. So how can you help the monarchs? The best way to do it, the most important one, is obviously plant more milkweed. That's what the Milkweed Promotion Board wants me to say. So obviously plant more milkweed. But also as important is don't use insecticides. So avoid those in every instance possible. There's no place to use insecticides in a place that a monarch is going to be using, and they use all flowers. So it's not just the milkweed you have to avoid insecticides on. It's avoid insecticides, period. And that especially includes mosquito sprays, which don't work anyway. So don't spray them. Get a fan if you have mosquito issues, but do not spray for mosquitoes. Dan? Jumping ahead of me. Flea and tick treatments for dogs, and their collars, or sometimes they're given a drops, or sometimes they're taking medicine, exude through their skin so that when insects or ticks bite the dogs, they die. What happens is the people who love these dogs will pet the dogs. The insecticide also absorbs into our skin, and you can't wash it off. So clean hands don't wash off the insecticide. So if you're going to handle monarchs or be around insects, just put gloves on so that your skin isn't in contact. And most people are not out there handling insects intentionally with, potential contact with dog medicine. So it's not a big concern. I would say that's not the number one problem monarchs face. But if you were interested in raising monarchs, which a lot of people do as a hobby, that's one of the hidden dangers is if you have pets in the house that use these flea and tick collars or drops or sprays, is no barehanded touching of the milkweed or the monarchs. Annual flowers, which one, I think that's just an awful thing, is that a lot of these nurseries will grow their plants in such a way that the insecticides are built in so that they look beautiful when they ship them to the stores, and you want to buy all those petunias and marigolds, but they're systemic, so they're in there, so it's in the nectar. And while they're not going to touch the plant and keel over dead, they're going to have that in their system, and they're going to die someplace else. So if they were instantaneous and every insect that landed on them and they died, people would be up in arms over that. But since they die someplace privately, it's not getting as much attention as it should. So be very careful where you're sourcing your annual flowers from to make sure that they're not insecticide treated. And that even organic insecticides like these BTs, the Bacillus thuringiensis, that are targeting to caterpillars, very toxic to any caterpillar, not just monarchs. Plant native milkweeds, of course, and then the nectar plants. They need something to eat, especially the migrating ones in the fall. That's where the flowers start dwindling. But the asters and the goldenrods are really good in the fall, and they look so good together too. Minimize mowed areas. I had to put that in here because we're wild ones, and that's our thing, is to plant more native plants. So any excuse to shrink the lawn and make more native plant beds, the better. And then the whole point of this presentation is for you to take it and talk to your friends and family with it. So tell them why you love monarchs and make them love monarchs too. So I think that is it. That is the end of my presentation, unless there's any questions. And I apologize that I don't have this ready, packed up and ready to hand out tonight, because I plan to do a few more updates, but I hope you will use it. I don't want me to be the only one ever showing these slides to people. So,
does anybody have a question? We've got mics.
oh, excellent question. Tropical milkweed in our area is an annual, so it's just a pretty flower, but it never, until it freezes and dies, it never gives the signal that it's time to migrate, because it's going to stay nice. So they need that signal. The other reason is in the southern areas where it is more native, like in Texas and Florida, I think can grow year round there, is it can harbor that parasite called OE, which that's the name I can't pronounce, and it will stay on the plant. So multiple butterflies will visit it, and it will be kind of like a gathering place for germs.
Aren't good for the milkweed, but I have a raised bed where I have different plants there. And when the caterpillars are there, it's just massive amounts of, butterfly manure. So I can't see how it's not beneficial in some way.
I never thought about butterfly manure, but
Just a thought.
okay, we'll give one to the butterflies for providing some fertilizer.
And I noticed on your map, it said the Florida monarchs do not migrate. How about the ones that were over in the Far East? Do they migrate?
No, not if it's tropical enough for their milkweed to live year round, they just stay year round too.
Okay, so has there been any trend toward monarchs never having to go all the way to Mexico? I would think it would be warmer, but is that just a place where their food exists, or why would they pick that spot?
Why they pick it is the trees up there, it's at the right humidity and right temperature, because it's not freezing. It stays usually in the 40s or 50s, so it doesn't freeze up there. And those trees kind of work like heat sinks, so they stay warm in the sun, and then at night they give off heat. So it's kind of like the urban heat effect, except in a forest. Now, how that evolved, how they ever figured out how to get to Mexico, I don't know that anybody knows how they figured it out way back when. But yeah, I don't know if, like in southern Texas or northern Mexico, if there are resident monarchs, because that does seem odd that only that little Florida panhandle would be resident. I don't have all the answers about stuff, and I'll try not to make stuff up.
Two questions. Well, one's a comment. When my daughter was little, so she's 42 now, so 35 years ago, we used to sit in the backyard on Labor Day weekend and just watch the monarchs fly over. I mean, you could just see them going like flocks.
Wow.
But you don't see that anymore. It's really sad that you don't see them. And the other one is a lot of people have little butterfly cabins where they grow their monarchs in. And I bought one for me and one for my daughter. How do you get started in that?
Oh, good question. Because I do that with a handful of them every year too, just because I like to see them. It's not advised like you do generation after generation. So when they're a butterfly, you let them back up. But the best practices for that is you have your habitat, and then you take a stalk of a milkweed leaf. Depends what you find a caterpillar in the wild and the leaf that it's on, and you bring that into the habitat. Keep the leaf moist, depending on the size of the leaf and the size of the caterpillar and how fast they eat it. Make sure they always have fresh milkweed. And the main thing is to keep the manure cleaned up. It's called frass because it just sounds more delicate and ladylike to call it frass rather than poop and manure. Keep that cleaned out of the cage. So that's every day for sure, cleaning that out of the habitat. But normally these are kind of mesh-based, is yours kind of, yeah. Then they will, when it's time for them to pupate, they will know to crawl to the top of the cage and make their little button and do their thing. So fresh milkweed all the time and clean the stuff out. And never get more caterpillars than because it's hard, because you see caterpillars out there and you take these little itty bitty, 5 little bitty ones. When they're 5, 2 or 3 inch caterpillars, they're eating a milkweed a day. So it takes a lot of milkweed to feed them when they get that big, and they'll be protected. So they're probably going to make it that far. So just start with a couple, and then you'll gain some experience. But it's fun to do. There's nothing wrong with doing that as a hobby, but never buy caterpillars. Just, find them in a natural area. Plant milkweed in your yard and they'll come to you.
So when they pupate in the wild, what are they attaching to typically?
They will usually go away from the milkweed because they don't want their predators thinking they're part of the milkweed anymore. So they'll go, 10, 15 yards away and find another plant or a bush. I've seen them on rocks. I've seen them. They're actually really hard to see. So whenever I find them, I think it's my lucky day because they hide really, really well. So they'll go on like a little branch because they look like a little green leaf. I mean, they're only tiny little chrysalises. But generally, if they have a choice, it will not be on milkweed.
Yeah, I agree with that in terms of where they are doing out in the wild, because what they will generally find is a sheltered space that is not real windy, and one that kind of is a reasonably good hiding place for them. And so I think that that's what you typically have found there. One of the things a lot of people misunderstand is that when a butterfly has become an adult, it no longer grows. When it becomes an adult, it's at full development, and that's the area. Question though, in terms of the first instar, I've read some areas where the first instar will do a circular chewing pattern around there, and that basically then provides protection for the next instars from the standpoint that disrupts the flow of the latex and that through the leaf structure. Is that a true statement?
Yes, I should have included a slide on that. I have a video actually of a caterpillar. This is a bigger instar, but it will actually nip the vein where the latex is and bite it, let the latex drip out, they'll back away. The leaf will actually droop, and then they'll start eating the leaf because then it won't have as much latex in it. So they're pretty good engineers as far as that goes. So somehow they kind of know to avoid that white stuff. If the first bite doesn't get them, they stand a really good chance. That's a thank you, Lee, because I do have a video of caterpillar kind of clipping the leaf up a little bit.
Anybody else?
Thank you, everybody, for being such a nice audience for my stressful day. Appreciate that. Any other announcements before we go? We can have some treats and socialize and look at pretty monarch pictures.